This time, we're continuing our Foreign Sci-Fi month by watching Solaris. And along the way, we asked, what other great films were stuck behind the Iron Curtain? What stopped Chris from murdering everyone else on the station? And was Tarkovsky trying to solve a problem that didn't exist? Sometimes you become a podcast without wanting to, and this is Force-Fed Sci-Fi. All right, folks, welcome back to another bodacious episode of Force-Fed Sci-Fi. My name is Sean Michael Culp, and along with me is my friend and co-host.
I am Chris Rupp, and today we are joined by not one, but two special guests. Our first guest, you know him, he's been on the podcast before, Mr. Brian McLeod. Welcome back to Force-Fed Sci-Fi, Brian.
What's up, guys?
And also joining us, we have a first-time guest, but also very much a film buff. We have Mr. Matt Hoopert joining us.
Hey guys, thank you for having me. Very fun.
We are very excited to have both of you on Force-Fed Sci-Fi. We're continuing Sean's picks with Foreign Sci-Fi month, and this is kind of a bit of a, I guess, left field pick for Sean with Solaris.
Yeah.
I guess not exactly left field. This has been kind of held up as a very much a...
We don't have to pepper this, Chris. I totally just Googled randomly best foreign sci-fi films.
Well,
in
that
Google.
explains a lot.
And this came up. So,
Well, I appreciate the candor.
so there you have it, folks. Thank you, Googles, for this.
Oh, man.
Yes, we're excited, though, to jump into this. Chris, do you want to give us a synopsis?
Absolutely. So, following reports of strange occurrences, psychologist Chris Kelvin is sent to the space station orbiting the planet Solaris to evaluate its occupants, only to find out that he is not immune to the planet's phenomena.
Phenomena.
Do.
So right off the rip, it sounds like it's pretty interesting.
On the surface, yes, but then you realize this is a nearly 3-hour-long movie, and there's no way to fast forward through it.
Yeah.
There need to be more Muppets. I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah.
As soon as you
Muppets?
did the phenomena thing, it's like there aren't enough Muppets.
I don't think Muppets were in the Soviet Union, but if they were probably like off-brand, like Muppets or something.
The Muppets.
Well, you sit down, you eat your borscht,
Right,
and you watch Muppets.
They all worked in a factory. They were all really happy.
Trust me, not enough Muppets will save this film.
Gosh. Coming in hot. Coming in hot.
Brian is ready to just murder this movie.
Yeah, just a heads up, folks. Brian wants to murder this film. So the director, Tarkovsky. So just I guess a precursor. I was talking with Matt about this, and then you were the one that was like, "Hey, Tarkovsky is like one of the greatest of all time. He's hailed."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Who?"
So I have not seen a Tarkovsky before this movie, but I have just known from reading about film stuff and that kind of thing that his reputation is up there with some of the great directors of all time, right? Like he's considered sort of like one of those like highly influential international cinema icons kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I believe it too, because I know that we've said that I'm going to just knock out this movie in this podcast, but you can tell that he's a great director with some of the shots in this film and some of the color profiles and just the overall storytelling. You could tell that he's definitely up there with some of these shots, especially considering this was all done in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And also with Russian filmmaking techniques.
Yeah.
All the rubles on hand.
I wish we had just an hour to talk about Tarkovsky's life before he made this movie, because this dude lived through some stuff.
Well, can you share some of the highlights?
And you can,
yeah.
Well, you can even you don't even have to read his biography. You just look at his face, like a photo of his face, and you're like, that dude went through some stuff.
Yes.
He's just got one of those those are creases that are earned. He's got one of them faces.
I mean, according to family lore, there was royalty somewhere way in his past. He enlisted in the Russian military in like 1939. He served in World War II and lost a freaking leg.
A chill time to enroll in the Russian military, by the way. 1939. Super chill time to be a Russian soldier.
Or that may have been his dad. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of there's some conflicting information out there. It looks like, but I mean, either way, like Matt was saying, like you look at a picture of this guy, like even when he's in the 70s or the 60s, and even in the 80s, this dude looked like he's spent some time on a mountaintop with this harsh wind blowing in his face, and just thinking about all the people he's seen murdered.
Well, yeah, I was laughing because I think maybe like I read the Wikipedia, or no, I was reading there was a pretty good New Yorker thing on Tarkovsky like in February that I just reread before this, and there was a line that I literally started laughing out loud because it said his mom got upset he was hanging out with like the wrong crowd, and so she sent him to Siberia on like a workers expedition or something, and then the next line said it was one of the happiest times of his life. Like I guess he went to Siberia and he was just like, this is great. I don't know why everyone's so upset. This is beautiful.
What? We're here in summer camp. There's 9
having
feet of
great
snow,
time.
but this is summer in Siberia.
I'm having a great time. Beautiful open vistas.
We talk about his appearance, and I just Googled him, and you could just tell just by he has like that mustache, and it's just it kind of looks like a flat top, but he had a flat top, but he hasn't gotten a haircut in a while because he just doesn't care. He's been through a lot of stuff. And that jawline too, that just screams. I know we were talking in pre-production. We were talking about Ed Harris, but that's just like Ed Harris, Ron Perlman type jawline.
Well, he really, I think part of his legend was his appearance and his persona, right? Like part of it was like the idea of him as like a towering, icon was partly just people looking at him and be like, yeah, that dude, look at that dude. Like he just has that look, I think.
If he's directing you, are you going to challenge him? Right. I'm like, no, you do exactly what he says.
Right, 100%.
Very much just like, I mean, he looks like your stereotypical, like just Russian hard ass. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I mean, you look at his body of work and just how much he's lauded by almost like the entirety of Russia, even though he defected in the mid 80s because he wanted to make more films in the West, and they still love him. By all accounts, he's still very much a Russian hero.
Yeah, I've never heard of this guy until we watched this film.
Same until Matt was like, he's amazing.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I read it part too that like it's part of like the Russian lauding of him now too is like he's sort of been like in a very unfortunate way like reclaimed by sort of the more nationalist sectors and population in the country. Sort of one of those like he the work gets lauded after his life, not always by like the crazy people, but also like it's still considered like I think even in the West like considered like highly influential and towering in terms of like just what he brought like to cinema for the first time and like really amplified in his movies and stuff.
By all accounts, very much a beloved filmmaker. Well, we have a bit of a fun thought experiment later that we'll get into regarding Tarkovsky, and we apologize in advance for any Russian mispronunciations because y'all have got some complicated words to pronounce. So we're gonna do our best to kind of fumble through those. But this cast too, I mean, we'll certainly get into their performance a little later, but this cast kind of works well together. I mean, we have our leading man, Chris Kelvin, played by.
You got it.
I'm so sorry for how this is written. Donatas the Bananas.
You sound like me trying to pronounce regular names.
I mean, it was very tempting to say bananas, but like that's not right.
It would be so funny if like that cast was like that, and then one of the people was just like Greg Clark. Like if it was just like one of the actors was like Stanley Johnson.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out the pronunciations. I can't, I don't even know where to begin.
And Vladimir Zamansky voiced him because this was dubbed, apparently.
Yeah, that's one thing I found very interesting is that this is a good cast and there's some good performances, but I've noticed throughout the film that there was a lot of voiceovers, and that was very jarring. about the film is that almost all the actors had voiceovers, and the sound that happened on the set was completely muted out. Like you could even hear like Foley artist type recordings of like footsteps, and it was just like it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great to the point where you just don't realize it. Like it's very evident that that those footsteps are artificial.
That's
I
the
agree. It
Tarkovsky
rocks.
legend.
I have to agree, it rocks.
That's actually very much a European style filmmaking, because in American films, like you see, quiet on the set, don't talk, you'll mess up the sound.
Yeah.
In Europe, they'll just do whatever the hell they wanted behind the camera. Like there's people lighting cigarettes, there's talking, because all the work is done post-production. Like if you watch like Sergio Leone westerns, everything you hear in that movie is dubbed or is done in a studio. Every single bit of sound.
Wow.
And if like my wife and I were actually watching James Bond movies right now, we're going through the early ones, and some of the dub work is just awful in those movies. But it's very much that European style where there isn't quiet on the set. It's just do whatever you want and we'll fix it in post.
And part of that too, I wonder, is like when you're you think about watching like a movie like this now, and you're like, it's very jarring because you're just not used to it. If you were watching a movie at the time in like the early 70s, so many movies were probably dubbed over and like done in post. So it might just be one of those things where like when you have the experience now of if you're watching like, Star Trek at home and you're like, I'm seeing like so much caked on makeup, it's insane. But at the time, if you were watching it on TV, like your brain wouldn't even be processing it in like the same way, because you're just like inundated with that same kind of stuff. So that might be part of it.
Yeah.
Holla. for Hari, well, who's our femme fatale? Brian, you knew some backstory of this.
Yeah, this is some interesting casting choices. I'm not even going to pronounce the director's name. So the director originally cast his ex-wife as Hari, which
Awkward.
very. That's a bold choice, foolish but bold.
It's a James Cameron choice. It's the more we learn about him, I'm seeing.
Oh God!
It would be funny if Hari had to be like super buff, like Linda Hamilton. Like if that was, he was like, you also have to do like CrossFit like all day.
Well, that didn't happen. But luckily, he met this other actress. Who was it? Bibi Anderson?
Natalia Bondarchuk.
Well, no. There was one other person before we get to Natalia. There was one other person that was originally cast as Hari, but she ended up being recast as the mother because the director met Natalia, and Natalia would then take the role of Hari. So it got tossed around. The role got tossed around quite a bit, but I think they nailed it with Natalia, because she really was the best performer in my opinion in the film. Like she carried it.
Definitely, I think definitely the right choice to pick with somebody who's younger and allows the audience to kind of like this inway into
not your ex-wife,
right? Well, it
That's
allows the audience this inway into the second and third acts of the film as like we're coming into unfamiliar with this situation the same way as Hari is, because her last memory is probably killing herself, and then boom, she's back with her husband and somewhere in the space station in the middle of the universe.
Yeah.
Surprise. Great way to be resurrected.
An amazing way to be born. You just come in and you're like, oh gosh, this place sucks.
And even Tarkovsky singled out Natalia. Like he even wrote in his diary that she outshone everybody.
Yeah, I mean, like I think there's no bad performances, but it's pretty evident when you're working with someone who's a really, really good actor, and they just outshine you. They just make all the other actors look like amateurs.
Well, she has like the craziest role in terms of like the mental work she has to do, right?
Oh
it's
yeah,
like,
the prep work, and considering the acting style at that time too. It's
and like just in terms of like what it's like she doesn't have memories that are the exes, but she has memories, but they're not like. But she's also like just being born, but she's not human, but she is like there. It's like the way you would have to do like the mental gymnastics is just like crazy to think about.
It's weird seeing Chris's and Hari's relationship reflected only through the perspective of Chris.
Yeah, absolutely.
because I mean, marriages break apart for numerous reasons, and everybody is kind of set in their own ways and thinking like, well, I'm right, what I believe is right, this is how we should do things. And there's always, that's why it's a marriage, there's two sides of each coin.
She kind of loses her part,
Yeah,
like her soul as who she is as a person. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Just like watching this, I was like, oh, it's like if you had a chance to go back in time and like see one of your exes or whatever, like right the wrong or whatever, re-experience that relationship, but it's only with your part.
Right,
Like
and
they lose their.
I mean, I get like the whole, obviously like a big theme of the movie is like memory and like our version of reality and stuff. And it's so interesting to think about like someone is getting the personified version of their idea of someone who's not in their life anymore. And like, how does that look in practice? And like, what if that memory, your version of events actually showed up and they were like, what help? Like, I'm scared. Like, your version of me is terrified. Like, what is this? You know, it's such an interesting like thought experiment.
I'm going to kill myself again.
I'm so freaked out.
Yeah, that was definitely the most jarring scene of the movie, is to see her dead on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
And to come back to life and just be like, oh my gosh, I have to go through all of this again.
Yeah.
And when she was just spazzing out on the floor, I was just, the only thing I was thinking to myself, my God, I wish my back could move like that now.
Oh, right.
I was like,
Like, everything hurts more when you get older.
oh, no. No, I joke around because I can't. I would make the world's worst ninja, because if I just like bend my knee, I'll just hear like,
Oh, boy.
That hurt me.
Oh,
Yeah.
my gosh.
and it's like, even if I'm laying in bed, it's just like straight on my legs. Just,
Yikes.
but
Youth.
yeah, but good for her for having a strong vertebrae.
That's a great takeaway. I love that you got to that end of Solaris and you were like, you know the thing though?
She's
great
very bendy.
back. Very flexible.
Well,
Makes me
Very flexible.
appreciate flexible. Someone that I appreciated in this film was Dr. Snout by Yari Yarvet or whatever.
he's got the umlauts above two of the letters. So
Wait,
like,
what are they called?
they're called umlauts.
I always forget
Oh.
that they're called that.
Umlauts.
Yeah, umlauts.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he's very much like he's able to tell Chris, be able to deliver him the hard news and tell him exactly like what's up and kind of put him in his place. Like she's a hallucination, right?
He's sort of like the middle ground seemingly
Yes.
between Chris and I cannot remember the scientist. Sartorius, right? Where Sartorius is like the extreme, right? Where he's like he's a bit of a dick. Where he's just like science over everything. Mm-hmm. These are not people. You cannot be emotionally attached to them. Like, or even not even saying you can't be like. But there's that scene where Chris is like, "Are you just jealous because I actually have an emotional connection?" And he's clearly like, "Yes, I am jealous. I don't like he doesn't." So it seems like Snout is like the middle ground between the two.
Well, if that's the case, then who was Dr. Gabarian in this station? Was he just the most susceptible to everything then?
I don't know.
Maybe.
That was my thing. Like, it's like, I wondered how his and Chris's relationship would have been, because they were both tight, and Gabarius, I believe, kills himself, allegedly, before Chris gets up there. So it made me wonder throughout the film, like, how would this movie have been different if the guy didn't die? Because they were really tight, and he, like, made videos for Chris to watch. Which I think, I don't know how that is.
Nice.
It was nice.
Nice.
I'm probably going to be dead when you get up here.
A little weird to leave somebody a video suicide note.
Yeah.
A little jarring, not going to lie.
Yeah.
We were talking this before, but like, it's just amazing that all of the ones that are like, oh, he made this cruddy video footage for you, and it's just like the most beautiful. Like, it's still still a Tarkovsky movie within a Tarkovsky movie. So all the raw footage is just like glorious cinema. It's amazing.
Their cameras are exceptional in the
They have
future.
exceptional security footage.
It's like when you found out Paul Verhoeven directed the commercials in RoboCop.
I'd buy that for $1.
Call back to our first guest appearance of Brian on the Foreign Sci-Fi podcast.
Which I wanted to say, when you left Ready Player One, you're like, well, see you in 3 years. It's only been 7 months. So...
Yay, how about that? Glad you guys are punctual. on top of it.
Well, well,
3 years and 7 months. Hey, that's a nice upgrade. So, all right. How about
Time moves fast.
we'll kind of breeze through the rest of this cast list here. We've got Vladislav Georgetsky.
Oh, we're
I guess.
breezing through this already.
Is he Sartorius?
He's Burton.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he's the pilot that's interviewed in the Tarkovsky edited interrogation video.
Mm-hmm.
Nikolai Grinko and Olga Barnett are Chris's mother and father. Anatoly Solzhenitsyn plays Dr. Sartorius. And then Sargisian.
It looks like they just threw letters together.
Russia, help us out with this. Come on.
You know,
You don't
I
make
have
this
a-
easy for us.
I have a subscription to Duolingo. I'll just pass it along to you guys so you can join my account so you can start brushing up on your Russian.
I had read that the guy who plays Sartorius, again, I'm a novice with the Tarkovsky stuff, but I'd read that he's like Tarkovsky's muse, basically. He's in like almost all of his stuff.
Yep, I think I saw him in Stalker.
Yes.
Yes,
One of the Stalker guys.
so maybe.
Yeah.
Could be. Every director's got their guy.
Got their dude. It would be funny if it was Robert De Niro. If he was also, if he like at the same time he was doing all the Scorsese's, if he was also in all these Tarkovsky movies.
That's
be
a
great.
fun thought experiment.
Trust me, Robert De
shows
Niro would
up.
not save this film.
Anyway, yeah, I think that's pretty much. Yeah, all these other people in this, there wasn't really much.
It's kind of hard to dig up information on Russian actors because as Westerners, we don't have access to films that were made back then, and we still don't. I mean, we probably could if we went through like back channels or anything like that, but for a long time, like these films were just firmly stuck behind the Iron Curtain. There was no way to watch them.
Mm-hmm. And it's like amazing too, and I guess speaks to like his, kind of legend that like he's like a handful of like kind of name brand like Russian directors from that period that really like rose above that to become like an international kind of film icon, in a way of like like Kurosawa or something. Like he just has one of the like you can list off a name of like these like iconic 20th century film directors, and he's one of them, and I feel like that speaks partly to how revered he was getting out of that system.
Oh yeah, and his style choices. His film, as we get into this, it's just very interesting. Like when this ended, I think I texted Chris, or I texted maybe all of you, like, I don't know if this is the most brilliant film I've seen, or just like craziness. I don't know what the hell I just watched.
Well, craziness is on point. But I want to circle back real quick. Chris, you mentioned that it's hard to articulate Russian performers throughout the Soviet films. But if there's one thing that we can articulate is acting styles, and that is Stanislavski's acting method, which is, if you're an actor out there, it is like they teach you this in acting school now, and a lot of like famous actors. I think Al Pacino used this acting technique, but if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Al, please don't whack me. But I have it pulled up on here, and it's focused on intense atmosphere. Its work is emphasized on experimentation, improvisation, and self-discovery. Until his death in 1938, he taught the elements of the Stanislavski system, which is in the form of relaxation, concentration of attention, imagination, communication, and emotional memory. And we talk about Hari's performance, and that a lot of it is like pulled back from emotional memory, which, if you really think about it, when you start peeling back the layers and who Hari is discovering who she is and throughout her journey in the film, it adds a lot more weight to the performance, and I've said earlier that she's the best. She gives the best performance in the whole film, and that's why, because of creating an emotional memory based off of from the text itself. So yeah, we probably will never know what these performers are actually like, but we could look at the acting method that is behind it, and that really drove this film. And with all that in consideration, we could really judge based on performances and a little bit about the actor's personality as well. So even though hers was a little bit over the top, I know like Kevin, or that guy, he was much more reserved, and he kind of just looked like he looked like he just is the lead singer of a Smiths cover band. But you could tell by his posture and like just the emotional weight that he's carrying throughout the film, because he's I don't know if we're going to talk about it, but like he's just not willing to revisit his past.
I had read a review that said he kind of, from the reviewer's perspective, felt like he kind of doesn't quite know what movie, he can't really figure out what movie he's in. And that did kind of seem like I could see that.
Well,
I liked the performance, but I could understand that view.
I can understand it too, but I think it's just, it's not, sometimes some of these acting styles may not translate well on the film. I feel like his acting performance would do exceptionally well in a very intimate black box theater space type of environment. Because I could definitely see like he's trying to figure it out, or maybe to your point earlier, Chris, that in European films there's just so much going on and there's no quiet on set. Maybe he's distracted by the
the PA smoking in the back,
by the PA asking for more money,
or any money,
or
the government telling them how much film they can.
Yeah.
Ever use the reel yet?
But I know that was just like the acting method. That whole bit was improvised because it just dawned on me right now. It's like, Stanislavski. It's an acting method. Look it up. It's pretty basic and standard in all your acting classes that you'll find. And it's universally praised, and it's still incredibly relevant to this day.
Well, it's amazing when you brought up like how crazy it is to think about the actress who does Hari trying to, because like you said, it's like part of the Stanislavski thing is incorporating memories and like into your performance and stuff. It sort of reminds me of like when someone does like a really good performance of like a clone or like a robot, where it's like a nuanced layered performance where you're like, how they have to pull such a mental tricks on themselves to figure out like they're not human, but they have to imbue like what it would feel like to go through this experience as an inhuman thing. It's such a hard, it's like it seems it's tough.
Hard.
Like
it's
it seems really tough.
And you have to work from the script, and anything that's not on a script, you have to make it up on your own. But more importantly, you have to like, as from an actor's perspective, you have to show vulnerability in front of the camera. Because one of the things that they taught me in acting school is that the camera does not lie. And if you think you're sad, but if the camera's saying you're not sad, then you're not sad. Right. But I think Natalia went there with Hari, killed it.
She didn't have dead eyes?
No. All right, I'll get off my soapbox.
No, that was good.
No, it's
Great
good
point.
insight into what Natalia was doing with her performance.
Probably doing too, but I think that's the closest thing we'll ever get to it.
Well, and then we contrast that with, Chris as the protagonist of this movie, and definitely kind of seems very dispassionate and almost just detached from the sheer emotional weight of the fact that he's leaving Earth, leaving his family, leaving his whole life behind, and then joining up with this space station to kind of figure out where the hell everybody's gone. And then all of a sudden my dead ex-wife shows up, and it just seems like he like you guys, like Matt and Brian were saying, like it almost seems like this guy doesn't know what movie he's in.
Yeah,
he doesn't even look. I mean, his outfit was very interesting to me. A leather jacket with like these a mesh shirt,
wearing like the same shirt as Lena Dunham girls,
and like these skinny jean pants with like
and a gray highlight.
Like, it's you're at a space station, right? Not some underground punk club in Moscow.
Yeah. It's totally like one of those outfits that you watch and you're like, honestly, if you wore that like in Bushwick now, it might be kind of good. Like it sort of works like if you're in the right area.
I was
New York space station.
Well, it's clear that those million rubles went to like set design and not costumes.
But I love that it's and like this is sort of, I feel like the thing people say about Star Wars, right? It was like part of like the invention of that is that it looks so lived in, and this in a much like different way looks like some stuff has happened here for years, right? Like this has been, because they bring up when is it Burton who, when he shows the tape, it's like, that was like 20, 30 years ago. So this stuff has just been happening at this space station for like decades, and it certainly looks like
it looks like a bunch of meth heads broke their lease and just decided to trash the place before leaving.
Right.
Except his room. Chris's room was pristine. The one room that they didn't mess up.
The one room where all the budget went to.
Whoever the Soviet version of Marie Kondo was back then in space.
That scene where he was walking around like, this doesn't give me joy, and he like throws it in the trash is really great.
I love this movie.
It's pretty great.
Yeah,
pretty great.
we know, Sean. We know.
It's pretty great.
I enjoyed like Chris's reaction when his wife comes back is immediately to like finagle her into a spaceship and just send her back home. Like, what are you doing here? Ah!
It's a great. It's such a good visualization of like he can't comprehend this, so he's like, let me just shoot this into space.
It's very much like a brutish man response. Like, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm going to smash it and destroy it.
Light myself on fire.
It's the equivalent of blocking somebody on your phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like
But then Snout comes out. He's like, oh,
Hey,
okay, yeah, been there,
we
done
did that.
They're just looking at him like, you know she's going to come back, right? Like, do we tell him, like, no, let him find out.
Shoot
Oh,
my
that'll
ex
be
into
funnier.
space. Who among us? It's like such a funny.
That's why I love Snout the whole film. He's like, hey.
What are you gonna do?
He's the epitome of the shoulder shrug.
I don't know. It's
And
crazy
clearly
here.
something has happened on this station that has caused everyone else to flee, right? So why are you sending one psychologist to try to figure out what's going on? Why not send more scientists? Why not send like an actual investigative crew or a team of astronauts that can resupply the station? Why send one guy who's clearly looks like somebody peed in his cereal and then send him on his way to the station?
He's the active embodiment of depression. I feel like that's Chris.
Right.
Like he doesn't seem like he wants to be there. And I don't think he does any psych work up there.
He doesn't really like open the notebook. Nobody sits on a couch.
heaven knows he's miserable now. So
Oh,
So
man.
tell me, why do you think you're hallucinating a 4-meter tall child? Tell me.
And they even call him out. They're like, what work have you done? Other than sitting and banging your ex-wife
Right.
for
Just hanging out with your
Listen,
ex.
they probably didn't have a good budget in the space station, so they had to hire like an entry level.
Right. The health insurance is not great on Solaris. They don't have a great, they have Cigna or whatever.
Yeah, the
I don't
only-
know. they have to like do work with we couldn't get like this is a student at the psych school or something. Exactly.
I'm just like, I still couldn't get over the fact that he just wasted a spaceship with them lady, and they're
It's a
like,
waste of resources.
like, how many spaceships do they have?
They have
to
like 30
shoot
of
How do
them.
we know he really wasted a spaceship, though? I mean, if Hari's hallucination, what if the spaceship he put her on was one, too?
Well, that's the thing. Was he ever even on Earth? I don't know. That's my whole thing. I don't know.
The
Hey,
kids were afraid of a
he
horse.
shows up at the end. Oh, I'm back home.
This
Guess not.
this movie definitely kind of throws you through like a definite mind fumble here.
100%.
It's insane, and like it's crazy to think that Tarkovsky crafted this movie the
Right.
way he did.
Right. Well, like there are scenes at the beginning that in terms of how that ends, in terms of the movie, we're spoiling the movie, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's 50 years
It's
old.
50 years old.
Look,
People have had an opportunity
check
to
out-
see it.
Hey, check out Solaris if you haven't already. You gotta see this thing.
Oh, please don't.
But there's scenes in the beginning where I'm like, so it looks kind of funny. And I'm like, okay, so there's kind of maybe he's shooting day for night. There's like when it rains in the beginning, it's still light out, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe it's like a stylistic choice. And then at the end, when the ending happens, and they zoom out, and he's like on an island in Solaris when he thinks he's still home, like. It does make me like I haven't rewatched it, but I was thinking it must be such an interesting rewatch movie because you're like, is that a choice because that's how that just looks, or is that a choice because he's actually maybe he was always on Solaris this entire time? It's like it's a very fun like mental game you can play.
It's a
I think I'm gonna rewatch.
Tarkovsky way.
You're right.
It could be.
You rewatched it, right?
I did.
You watched it twice?
I watched it twice, Chris.
Oh my good
6
lord.
hours.
Jeez,
And
were
the
you
second-
drinking?
No, yeah, I have not relapsed. No, that would be awful.
Oh, good.
No,
good.
It was.
That would be a great if this movie caused you to like. That would be a great like. This movie was so bad I relapsed. It seems like I'm sure there's like a film reviewer who's done that trick. But it truly could be like you're like, this movie is so.
I mean, I get that. Battlefield Earth made me want to drink until I forgot about watching that movie.
Yeah, The Sound of Thunder. Oh. We've done some bad movies on this.
Yeah, Battlefield.
But that's the problem. Like with this, I was like, it's not bad like the movies that we've seen. You know,
No.
Battlefield Earth was terrible. That was terrible.
This is not demonstrably bad. I think this is like, I don't even know if this was made for the right reasons. Like, because I mean, this is based off of like a Polish novel that came out in the 60s. And this wasn't even the first adaptation of that novel. There was a Soviet television play that came out a few years before this. But Tarkovsky saw like Western sci-fi films as being like emotionally devoid of any sort of meaning. So, and he singled out 2001: A Space Odyssey as like the single worst offender of this, you know, just absolute devoid of any sort of depth or anything. And
Hilarious.
he sought to, in his quest to make sort of like the anti-2001, I think he made like the perfect Russian companion piece to that movie.
Right. So fun. I think that is so funny that because like they just came out with that the Sight and Sound list that, like, you know, every 10 years, right, where they ask a bunch of like people in cinema and stuff to rank like the top 100 movies. I feel like almost so many like the directors, like, here are my top 10 that came out, had 2001 on it. It's so funny to picture like Tarkovsky watching 2001 and just be like, this is garbage. Like, this is so bad. It's very funny to me. But you're right, like that he wanted to make like his like answer to, I saw like, I think it was the Ebert review that said like 2001 is like an exploration of like man's outward journey, and like this is an exploration of man's inward journey. It has like sort of like his companion piece that is trying to deal with like the exact opposite thing almost.
Well, in his effort to make the anti-2001, he even like copies 2001. He uses a piece from Sebastian Bach as like the main theme of the film.
Right.
It's like, and if you see, I mean, everybody knows that, you know, 2001 uses Alzo Sprach Zarathustra as like the main opening theme of that movie. Yeah. But
It's like when someone does a cover of a song because they're like, that song sucks, let me do a better version. It's like very weird.
Well, and it's now, I think, what you would call like the Streisand effect. It's like you're trying to pull attention away from something, but by doing so, you wind up creating more attention for it.
Yeah.
Like, people are still going to watch 2001: A Space Odyssey, but probably more so now because Tarkovsky hated that movie so much.
Why does this man hate this movie? Exactly. Yeah.
I think, I almost think like Tarkovsky was trying to solve a problem that didn't quite exist yet. And I get where he's coming from. I mean, because think about like the quality of science fiction movies that were coming out before Solaris comes out. We don't have movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. E.T. hasn't come out yet. Neither has Blade Runner or John Carpenter's The Thing. All movies like that we, you know, have talked about or will talk about at some point, and movies that not only are held as titans of the science fiction genre, but movies in general. And I think if Tarkovsky had just waited like 15 years, I think this argument of his would have just completely gone away.
But given the type of person he is,
No.
he don't got time for that.
He would have
No.
hated him.
He don't got time for that.
I was
But
like listening to his critiques on like cinema coming here, and he
Yeah.
like hated everything. He's like, it's all about marketing. If you have to market the movie for it to be a success, it's not good art.
But he like very, to your point, like very consciously, right, was trying to be like, I don't think there is like a deep philosophical sci-fi that I've seen that I appreciate. So he very much came in with like that kind of like that was like his intended goal coming in.
He was going to come in guns blazing, make the philosophical, emotionally deep movie he wanted to make. It just happened to be set in the science fiction genre.
And he did. That scene with like the car driving through Tokyo, wherever the hell he shot
Hey,
it.
if he had managed to stay alive through, you know, the 2010s, like, and see the movies of Denis Villeneuve, like, I think he would have changed his tune. Like, watching Arrival,
I was thinking
Blade
a
Runner
lot.
2049,
Right.
and Dune. I think he would have changed his tune.
I was thinking a ton, obviously, about Arrival. I'm sure that was like a big influence with like Solaris I'm sure it was like a big influence on the writing of Arrival and like Villeneuve and stuff, just in terms of like it's very, very similar, right? Like has the same kind of themes and stuff like that. It was very interesting to think about.
Yeah. I mean, it's I don't know if it was a problem that didn't exist, but I think it was a problem that people just were not thinking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
How did you think? So we talked a little bit about, he was during the Soviet Union. He had to like finagle everything with the Soviet Union, correct? Like with editing, the cuts, like even the amount of film he could use.
You mean the Soviet Union wasn't reasonable?
Chill, dudes. Real relaxed.
Color me shock.
Really chill. Well, yeah, everything was reviewed, right? Everything had to be certified by, like, it was basically like, all government everything had to be approved.
If you watch the miniseries Chernobyl, it's actually a great behind-the-scenes look in terms of how the Soviet government actually functions. Everything is committee.
Wow.
Everything is basically, like kissing ass of the person above you. And the filmmaking apparatus is no different. Everything is state-run. And
are you saying that the Soviet Union ran like corporate America?
Like Disney, dare we say?
and it failed.
Kevin Feige was the head of the film. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
If we had the time, like, I would love to talk about just the Soviet filmmaking apparatus, because prior to the Russian Revolution and even a short time after that, there was no filmmaking. There was nothing. The Romanovs controlled everything. And then post-Russian Revolution and the communists are in power, then you see filmmaking sort of start. You see the movie theaters start opening up and people going to them. But it's not until the release of Battleship Potemkin in 1925 where then Soviet filmmaking really takes off. But it's all propaganda films. It's educational films, like your people in your work farms in Siberia. Like, here's how you break rocks, here's how you shovel snow, here's how you pile dead bodies so they don't fall into a pile and kill you.
Very entertaining stuff, obviously. Very enjoyable.
Very dry though.
Yeah.
But then it's post World War II and Joseph Stalin's in power, and you know what Joseph Stalin loved? The war. Besides war and murdering his own constituents,
empathy, obviously. He loved famously empathetic man.
Joseph Stalin loved the westerns of John Ford, and he even commissioned Soviet filmmakers to basically make Soviet versions of John Ford westerns. He loved westerns and even forced members of his own Politburo to stay up till 4 a.m. just getting absolutely drunk and watching the same westerns over and over again.
It's really funny to think about that too, in terms of like that's what they liked, and then like in comparison to this, which is like slow, meditative, like non-narrative, and like in some senses like avant-garde. Like it's such a like drastic change from like something like that.
And this is still very much during the era of the Cold War, obviously. So there is films that are being made by the Soviet, cinema committee or whatever you want to call it, but it's all very propagandistic. It's all pro-communism. There are westerns being made. There are movies that are set in America being made by the Soviet Union, but they're told from the perspective of Native Americans who view Americans as colonizers and genociders, which, in some cases, I mean, we don't have time to really get into the atrocities perpetrated by the American government on its own soil against the native people living here.
It's another episode.
Yeah, exactly.
Another episode.
But there were many films made by the Soviets during that time that told that point of view or told that story and gave a very pro-communist message. Like, you couldn't even watch James Bond films in the Soviet Union. They were banned for such a long time. And it's not even until the mid-90s, the first, post-Cold War James Bond film it's shot in Russia in St. Petersburg, but it's still very much a Cold War story in a lot of ways, and kind of dealing with, Britain's and Russia's place in the world post-Cold War. So there's still, and even now, like Putin, I'm sure controls everything rolling out through Soviet cinema, or Russian cinema, I should say now. So it's weird to think about how little their filmmaking, or at least their techniques and storytelling, has not changed over the last 100 years.
I would say it's probably different than French filmmaking.
Yeah.
I mean, French filmmaking is very avant-garde, and they're able to like branch out and tell more stories, but I mean, I mean, if you look at Russian filmmaking over the last, God, even since Putin came to power, it's just all very propagandistic. And you look at Solaris and even other works of Tarkovsky as like sort of the outliers of that. Like he fought against the censorship that, or the suggestions that the state committee wanted him to do. He's like, no, this is the movie I'm making. You're not going to stop me.
Yeah.
And I really I had read that he really was one of the few, if not the only, director who could really push back in that era and be like, no, I'm not. They would tell him. I'd read they had tried to take some of the spirituality elements out of this and stuff like that, and he would just be like, no, and they're like, oh, okay, he looks everyone else would obviously be so scared, and I think it's again such a speaks to his reputation as the only man who or only person who could legitimately push back against the Soviet government to be like, no, I am making my movie. It's crazy.
I make movie. You don't stop me.
The more I learn about this man, he just seems more or James Cameron.
I know you're going to
seems
say
to emulate him more and more.
I knew you were going to say it. I would love to see Tarkovsky's Avatar. Just really slow, and just these really long shots of the water.
You do realize that's going to be 8 hours long.
Oh, it sounds great.
I want to see. I don't want to see a Tarkovsky directed Avatar. I want to see Tarkovsky, prime Tarkovsky, take on prime James Cameron in a bare knuckle fight. And I'm putting everything on Tarkovsky.
Yeah,
it's a close one. I think they both die. First of all, but
I think Tarkovsky wins, but he would stay alive just long enough to see Cameron die and then die immediately afterwards.
Right. He's I lived in Siberia. I will take you on.
My mission's complete.
Unless
I did summer camp in Siberia. This is nothing.
Unless it took place at the bottom of the ocean, then James Cameron would win because it's home turf.
It is.
It's his home turf.
He loves the ocean.
We're in the Marina Trench. This is my
neutral ground, Greenland.
It's Packers at Lambeau. It's hey, these are my people. These are my fish.
James Cameron is so funny. He shot a documentary and redid the door scene on Titanic.
I saw, yeah.
Just to prove to people that
he commissioned to study. Weirdly, this is very a weird footnote, but weirdly, the place I work on the elevator, it's one of those elevators that has fun facts, and they have one of those fun facts that keeps coming up is James Cameron just commissioned to study to see if the two Leo and Kate Winslet could both be on the door, and they can't. And I was like, why is this showing up at the elevator going to my? It's not a cinema. It's not a movie fun facts thing. It'll be the weather outside is 30 degrees, by the way. Anyway, that's a weird
It doesn't
footnote.
matter. There's a whole generation of of women who believe that Leonardo DiCaprio could have fit on that door.
Oh, there's
But
Reddit.
they can't.
Yeah.
They can't.
Threads. No.
Yeah, no.
He would have flown off.
But this isn't a podcast about the level of buffoonery that James Cameron perpetuates.
Nor is it a Titanic podcast.
Because Titanic isn't sci-fi. Not
to
yet.
our knowledge, yeah.
To our knowledge. No, this is a Solaris podcast,
Right.
which we are loving it. What did you... So were there any styles that he did, any choices in this film where you were just this man is out of his mind?
Brian, I know you've got some thoughts on that.
Yes, it's the slow pace. The first hour of the film, and I know it's all exposition heavy, but it just dragged so much. And first of all, let me preface by saying, I originally watched this film. I was at the gym. I was on the bike. And I was
the way he meant for you to watch it on the bike.
So in ideal circumstances, and I was just
well, the best movies are meant to be watched on a smartwatch.
100%.
oh no, I got my phone right in front of me, and I was just biking, and I was just what the.
This is if Christopher Nolan hears this conversation, he jumps off a cliff, right? He's just not the bike.
Well, the thing is that I mentioned this earlier. It made me wish that HBO Max or any streaming service has a playback speed option, because I found myself just skipping ahead a little bit. It's okay, come on, let's get over it. And I understand the intent behind the slow pace style and momentum building, but at some point it's just if nothing's happening, nothing's happening. We got to get the show rolling.
Well, So I'll preface by saying like I took a avant-garde film class in college. That was like one of my favorite classes I took. And what was so interesting about that class, like seeing a lot of these movies, right, is like you have to kind of like retrain your brain about how to watch them. It's like I saw in the Ebert review that he was sort of like a lot of these shots and these scenes, it's like, yes, you can see them as boring, or you could try to like take them in and contemplate like what is coming before the movie, what is coming up. It's like Tarkovsky, it's like one of those movies is like it wants you to be like meditating on it. It's sort of like trying to reteach you like how to actually like watch the film itself. I was thinking about that though, and also in the sense of I did get a little sleepy, and I would often get sleepy in that class because I would like watch. We would have like a screening every Wednesday, and it was also my busiest class day, so it was very hard not to fall asleep when you're watching like a movie where someone just falls asleep. Like we watched a Warhol movie where it's just shots of a man who's sleeping, and I was like, how am I not gonna fall asleep? Like. But it's one of the. It's like he's like one of the pioneers, right? Of like when people talk about like slow cinema, is like he's considered one of those, big icons of that sort of phrase.
It could be just me. This may not be catering to my liking. It doesn't goose in my geese, but
it is very valid, totally valid.
But it's like, I just found myself like again wanting to jump ahead, and that might be because of the films that we've been exposed to lately. It's like, okay, let's just get the ball, let's get going on here. But at the same time, when it comes from storytelling, in my perspective, like you got to hook them in, and you got to give them a reason to stick around. Because if you imagine like just putting this film in today's cinema,
no way,
no chance.
I mean,
people are walking out.
Well, there is a man who did release a movie.
James Cameron?
Long takes, yes.
Oh my God!
I mean, like an Avatar too. Like,
can we go 5 minutes
close.
without talking about
Even
James
close.
Cameron, please?
Sean, when you cut this podcast, you're gonna take out a lot of James Cameron bits.
Control F and find.
But no, it's like no. I the slow pace didn't agree with me, and even like in the second half, it got better. But there are times where it's just like, oh, this whole, like the whole floating scene, between Kelvin and Hari, which I thought that was like when I looked up, oh, there's a meaning behind it. It's like a metaphor or whatever. I picked up on that, but at the same time, at that point in the movie, it was just like the slow pace is I was ready to brew up some coffee, and it's 11 o'clock at night.
I mean, it's very much that like he wanted to make movies that were like high art, right? Like that was part of his like motivation, was like, I want cinema to be seen in the same category as great paintings, great music, all this stuff. And like part of that is he wanted to like maul on these like philosophical existential questions. I had written a quote down for one of the things I read that he said, it wrote one of his journals, the point of art is to prepare a person for death. Which I thought was very funny.
It's trust me, after this film, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Christ, that's bleak.
It's
very bleak.
So bleak, but makes like all the sense in the world that the person who makes a movie like this is like, hey, it checks out. We got to make this, prepare you all to die.
Well, between the four of us here today, I mean, we've seen like probably thousands of movies between all of us, and I have to say, for me personally, this stands out as one of the most glacially paced movies I've ever watched. Like, and here's the thing: like, The Godfather came out in this same year as Solaris did. I mean, granted, Solaris doesn't come out, doesn't release in the United States until 4 years later, but The Godfather is roughly the same length as this and is paced much better.
He was just trying to have you feel the mundane
I'm
life.
watching this as a layperson, and I'm finding there's like 35 minutes of movie that can be taken out of this.
So are we comparing this film to The Godfather?
No, like Godfather stands in a class above itself.
Oh yeah, it don't. Oh.
It don't even compare. But like I'm just saying, like there are techniques of making. You can make a 2 hour and 40-minute film that doesn't feel like a 2 hour and 40-minute film.
Not to compare,
but it's I don't like. I don't know. I'm not trying to I didn't watch this movie like, oh my god. But I do think it's like hard to compare in some ways because it's not the movie he's trying to make, right? He's not trying to make you were talking about his whole opinion of like cinema was it's like it's all marketing, it's all manipulation, it's all stuff like that. Like he truly is trying to like slow your brain down as a viewer and really have to think about things.
It's still a very artful film, and it's still very emotionally deep.
Right.
But even if he had made the edits of like taking time out of the film, all of that is still there.
Sure.
There's a lot of just dead film that he puts in there. Like driving through the city, I still cannot figure out the point of that.
It's a long way.
There's got to be a fan edit of this film somewhere.
I mean,
just really
I
cuts out
just
all
wanted
the
them to kick one of those like see-through things that was on the ground just
Sure.
one time.
One time.
Like all of the things that we were talking about, all the philosophical discussions, all of the themes, they were still present in this movie. But like all of the dead space could have just been cut out of it.
I feel like it would have a much impactful meaning if they got rid of all that dead space, because it's like when we talk about pace, you want people to keep thinking, and maybe that was deliberate of the slow pace. It forces the viewer to think about it, but at the same time, you're asking a lot from a viewer to like just sit there and be patient, think with their thoughts, but I felt like I understand the intent. I just didn't think it was executed very well. I think, yeah.
I hate to be. I don't want to be like. I'm not like devil's advocate about this whole. Again, I am not like this is the greatest thing I ever saw. I gave it a 4 on the 5 on the old letterbox. It's not like I'm not like a lot of people think it's a masterpiece. I don't know. I'm not really like. That's not for me to say. But I'm kind of the opinion that like it's not like. A movie is like the movie it's trying to be, and sometimes you have to like try to meet the movie where it is, right? Like a movie kind of tells you throughout its runtime like what it's trying to do. And I like agree because I did get sleepy. I do sometimes have a hard time with movies that are like in the quote unquote canon, and you put them on and you're like, okay, I do have to do laundry at some point, so I'm hoping this speeds up just a little. But when I think about it in terms of like what they're trying, the people who made it, especially like someone like Tarkovsky, like what he's trying to do, it makes sense to me, and it is sort of like coming at you have to come at it from like an angle of like, what is this movie trying to be, and is it trying to be like the best version of that kind of a thing. But again, that is not everyone's opinions are valid. I'm not a like you gotta love this movie where they drive around Tokyo for just a little bit.
Now,
Yeah, I mean, like
You don't have to. Nobody has to love this movie.
This is also
That's my take.
pre-internet. This is pre-internet and Soviet Russia eyes. So maybe they just didn't have a lot to do back then either.
Well,
so
and
the time was there. They're like, oh, this is a short film. This is fast-paced for them. Who knows?
And we've kind of we've brushed on this a little bit on just how avant-garde Tarkovsky was for the time, and I think kind of like a good thing to kind of like close out our main discussion on the movie is like this thought experiment, because when Tarkovsky made this movie, and if you look at the other side of the world in the West, you have filmmakers like George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, and even John Milius coming up and making their own brand of films and changing the landscape of Hollywood forever. So I guess like what I want to ask you guys is, do you think if Tarkovsky grew up in the West, would he fit in with this group, or where would he fit in this group?
It's such an interesting question because it's like, would it be? Is it because I have to think about it in terms of like, is he trying to come up with that group? And if so, is he trying to like radically differentiate himself from the types of movies that they're making, or is he trying to make similar types of movies that fit into that kind of? And I'm not asking in terms of like you need to answer that question. It's just an interesting idea, like because obviously there's a whole subcategory, subgenre, and with like miniature subgenres of American and Western avant-garde cinema that are happening at the same time as like the new Hollywood type directors. So it's like, does he just immediately get like pushed into that category, or does he find his like niche in like a Hollywood type of system? It's just interesting. There's no answer to that, but
Tarkovsky would have easily been the oldest of this group. I mean, because he was born in 1932, and Spielberg was, not even in diapers at that point. And I like to think that Tarkovsky would have been accepted in this group just because he had radical ideas. But also, too, Tarkovsky was very open in his criticism of just about everyone and everything that walked the planet.
He's a very angry man.
Yeah.
Also interesting about, because like obviously a big part of like the new Hollywood stuff was that the studios were like, we don't know what we're doing. All of these huge Sound of Music ripoffs we've made are destroying our studios because they cost so much. They're all bulky. They're so expensive. So we're just gonna let these kids from this newfangled idea of film school start like, hey, if you want to make a decision, you make a decision, like kind of thing. Like they kind of gave like the keys to this up and coming crop. So it's really interesting to think about like, what does Tarkovsky do if he's here with like complete studio backing during that period where
you can make the story you want to make. You just have to make it within the confines of the studio system.
Right. That's really interesting.
It is an interesting question, but I don't think he would last here in the West. Because
too hard conditions. No, I don't know.
Well, that too. But but you mentioned all the film directors. Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, Scorsese. There's one thing about all of those directors that just separate them from. I almost say Tchaikovsky, but that's somebody else. Is that they know how to hook a viewer into their story and keep them in their seats.
Yes.
And I know that this is an arts film. Isn't it like a Criterion remaster out there or something like that?
There.
He's certainly like one of the like Criterion darlings. He's like one of those.
But that's the thing. You have to keep the viewer engaged throughout the film, because if you don't, they're going to start thinking about their laundry. They're going to start thinking about the chores or some of the things that they could have been doing. But instead, the intent is there to like force them to think about their lives, to think about the past traumas that they have yet to confront. But it just doesn't work. Like we talk about The Godfather. You're immediately brought into The Godfather right away. It's like, it's Don Corleone's the daughter's wedding, and it's like, I'll make an offer, Copperfield, stuff like that. But for this, it's like 20 minutes of just nothingness and just Kevin just being all mopey,
I don't want to like.
But at the same time, as a cinematographer, 1,000% he belongs in that conversation, because this movie is shot beautifully from a storytelling perspective. It could have just been polished up. And I know we also talk about like marketing and stuff. This movie would not last that long, because, you have to like, if you market this movie as like an avant-garde piece, then maybe you might have a chance. But, I don't think that viewers from the mainstream audience perspective will appreciate this film as much as like, us, film buffs.
But I think like, and I recently heard somebody talk about this on a podcast of like, we do sometimes fall in this category, especially in like the Western cinema viewer, of like, a good story is like the hero's journey, right? Like that's the good story, is like you have obstacles, it fits kind of a formula. And sometimes I think like, and I fall into this category, I think you'll watch something that doesn't quite fit into that category, doesn't quite have those same elements, and it is easy, again, speaking for myself as well, to watch something that doesn't fit into that and you're like, oh, this is bad. And sometimes I have to remind myself, like, I can't walk into a museum expecting the arcade. It's sort of like one of those, like, I have to kind of like figure out, what's my connection, what's my into this. And sometimes that's realizing like, I thought this was going to be a surprise party and it's not. So I have to sit around, the mahogany seats with these college, professors, and just observe, whatever. Like you have to like, it's like, I try, I'm like shying away sometimes from trying to not feel like this is good versus bad, as opposed to like, this is a different intention than a lot of those movies that are considered like Western, like not Western's the wrong word, but like popular entertainment kind of movie.
This was in Soviet cinemas for 15 years.
15 years?
Gosh,
they did it
rocks.
in limited runs because, again, there weren't a ton of movie theaters in Russia, but they ran it in limited blocks for 15 years.
I mean, that makes sense for the length of this film. Oh my god.
It's amazing. 15 years.
Well,
That's like the Dark Side of the Moon version of the.
Well, and it's certainly unprecedented to us. I mean, the longest, in my freelance work and in doing like this podcast, the longest I've ever seen a movie stick around in theaters is about 8 or 9 months, maybe a year. But that's, you know how much money you have to continuously be making. I think the biggest example I can think of is the Clint Eastwood film Unforgiven, because that released, I think, in like June in 1992, but then it got a boost after it won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and then they kept running the movie.
Oh yeah.
It was in theaters for a full year.
Well, that movie's just incredible.
And Saving Private Ryan, I think, had a very long theatrical run as well. The first Avatar, I mean, I think that was still in theaters until June of 2010.
I also speaks wonder how much it speaks to the like there not being home video, and there not being obviously streaming, but there not being a lot of ways to watch this outside of going to a cinema. So if there was like a popular movie, I would assume, particularly in Russia at the time, would just be like, hey, you want to go see Solaris again for like the 38th time? It's the movie that came out 7 years ago. You know, it's like partly maybe speaks to that. And I know there are examples of that too, and like some in American cinemas of like, we're going again to see Bambi for 20 years ago, stuff like that, but certainly not to that extent,
Right.
To continuously be in theaters. Absolutely not. Yeah,
It's a pretty good legacy, though.
Yeah.
I would say.
But I mean, Tarkovsky wasn't the only one who viewed this as a failure. You know who else got really PO'd about it?
Who?
James Cameron.
no. Oh no.
Great guess, but no.
I didn't bring that one up this time, all right?
Actually, the original writer of the novel, Stanislaw Lem, got so mad at Tarkovsky, and they basically feuded about this movie basically until Tarkovsky died. Like Lem hated the fact that Tarkovsky diverged so much from the novel, and Tarkovsky fired back at Lem saying he didn't understand cinema. So it's just like this weird feud of like people who are in opposite medias. Just like, I'm mad that you ruined my book. Well, you don't understand movies. Like,
well, it's got that like Kubrick, Stephen King thing, right? Where
With
Stephen
The Shining,
King,
yeah,
where he's like, Stephen King's like, what a crap movie, right? And everyone's like, no, it's like a really good
He
movie,
prefers a TV movie of The Shining,
right? But it's
which,
sort of like that argument of like, it makes sense, right? Where like if it's so radically different than like the author's intention, obviously the author is going to be like, why did you do this? This is terrible. But you also get the other side, right, from the Tarkovsky's perspective of like, I'm trying to make like a movie. I'm not trying to rewrite your book or like.
This is why you don't involve authors in making the movie, because it's their baby. They're very protective of it. They don't want to see any changes to it. Like that was Tarkovsky's mistake.
You just can't make everyone happy, Chris.
No.
And I don't think there's really much for like toxic fandom that I found other than
Us, the two of us,
well, yeah.
beating up on Brian for just liking a 3.5 hour slow, non-narrative movie. I guess the two of us are the toxic fans.
we are the toxic fandom, man.
Yeah.
I only saw on IMDb a couple people were like angry about his portrayal of gravity. And how like her hair was falling down and wasn't portrayed.
I did not think you were going to say
This
that.
was shot in the 70s, okay?
It
Did not
was
think you were
made
gonna
for
say
less than $900,000. You're lucky to get the effects you got. All right.
Yeah,
I
they
thought
were
it was
still
great.
good.
But my favorite is there's one that 5 out of 7 people found interesting. It said when Chris was standing in the rain near the beginning of the film, the camera tilts down to the table to show a cup of coffee and various other items. The cut to the next shot of Chris shows him to have moved, which seems reasonable as a small amount of time has elapsed, but all the items on the table are now in different configuration.
See, it's sort of, this feels like that thing where if you're like a fan of The Matrix, like I am, anytime someone's like, did you notice that thing? You just go like, oh yeah, because they're in The Matrix. It makes sense. Like if you're a fan of this type of movie, and I guess I fall into that category, even though I will admit I did get sleepy. If you're a fan of it, you just go like, well, yeah, they're on Solaris. I don't know. It's like any type of like when that dog turned into a horse, you're like, yeah, I don't know, it's Solaris, baby. Like, what are you gonna do?
It's George Lucas like writing off Jedi, like, you know, leaps into Star Wars movies as like Jedi abilities.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing where it's like, hey, it's part of my universe.
Like, don't dig too deep in the plot holes. It's just the Matrix and its Jedi abilities.
When it rains, apparently stuff gets reconfigured on a table.
Look, hey, reality's crazy, man.
And
it's
Solaris.
like you just do one of those and yeah. Go
Well,
with it.
perfect. Well, anyone else have any thoughts before we give our ratings, which I'm sure you can figure out?
I'm just curious, has anyone seen the remake, the Soderbergh remake?
No.
No, that's something we didn't even talk about. It's crazy to think that like Steven Soderbergh like thought like, oh, I can remake this movie.
Right.
Yeah, with George Clooney, right?
With Clooney.
Yeah, with Clooney and like Soderbergh, when he made this, he was like the hottest filmmaker at the time. He was just like Traffic was like the absolute darling during the award season. Yeah, and he thought like, well, I can remake this movie because like again, it's director's vanity, just kind of coming into it.
And how
like,
did that movie do?
was not great.
Bad.
Oh.
It hurt. Like, I mean, got like
Shocker.
critical acclaim, but people were like, no, thank you. I had read that like I shouldn't speak on the movie because I haven't seen it, but I had read that it spends much more time on the idea that the movie does portray, but it digs in deeper to that idea of like his ex can only be the person that he remembers her to be, and it's only from his perspective. So like the Soderbergh's much more interested in that kind of character idea of like, how is this, you know, configuration of, you know, memory, and like, do we have, you know, everyone has a tainted idea of memory based off their own personal experience. So like, you're only imagining your side of a person. Can we ever really know a person we're that connected to, even, you know? So I think like Soderbergh is much more interested in that. I've read, I should say, again, I haven't seen it.
Well, I mean, it'll certainly be on our list. I'm sure we'll cover it at some point.
Absolutely.
Oh God.
Sexy
You can
Space.
all come back for Solaris too.
I'll take
That
a
might
rain
be
check.
more. Hey,
Well, I think with all that in mind, let's actually rate Solaris, shall we? So on our unique scale of the Force-Fed Sci-Fi podcast of would it watch, would own, it would host a viewing party. Brian, I feel like you're gonna have the most entertaining review rating, so let's start with you.
Man, this is just some old. I'm not going to say it. Look, I know I'm not going to watch this movie. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take it, put it in a box, ship it, burn the boat. Just as soon as it sinks to the bottom of the ocean, I'm going to tell James Cameron to get in the submarine, find it, pull it out, and burn it again. Look, this film. It's beautiful. It's really intriguing to look at, and like I couldn't keep my eyes off it because it is shot very well. But when you're trying to tell a complicated story, there's a level of like ego behind the storytelling because it was just so slow. It's like, oh, you gotta feel this feeling. The one film that I was thinking about while watching this that I could sort of compare this to. It's a totally different film, but it's Don't Worry, Darling. And that is because that film is like doing too much, and the pace was a little bit quicker, but it kind of just like it's trying to be so metaphorical that a lot of the meaning behind that movie goes over the viewer's head. And I feel like that was the same case in this film. Look, I totally understand its legacy. I totally respect the director. I totally respect that the influence behind it, but this is just it's not my cup of tea. Like, if you want to watch it, go ahead. And I totally understand that there is a rewatchability behind it, and maybe one day I'll see myself, you know what? I want to do something awful today. I'm going to rewatch this movie.
this is like the Comedy Central roast of Solaris.
It's like,
Like
look,
Solaris is sitting in the center, and you got Jeff Ross there, and like I don't know.
look,
For some reason, Pete Davidson's roast.
Yeah, Pete
there,
Davidson's
so he's
here.
like one SNL person.
and he's gonna look at the, he's gonna steal your girlfriend and all that. But look, I would not watch this movie. If someone makes this a viewing party, that is probably gonna be the worst party on the earth. Like, no,
You want to lose Brian as a friend, everybody. Host a Solaris viewing party.
yeah, no. I get it why people like it. I get it. It's just something I would not personally watch.
Sure.
Don't check your mailbox then.
Throw the invitation in the trash.
What about you, Matt? What rating do you give to Solaris?
Great rating system. I would say I would own it. I agree. It would be a tough party. You'd have to have really good past apps. Like, you would have to, like, really show out with the food, I think, to keep people excited. But I would certainly say, like, I'm probably in that camp of, like, I didn't connect to it in a way that I was maybe hoping I would fully connect to it, But I think when I was watching, I was like, if I rewatched this movie, if I put the time into it, I sort of, like, it was one of those I watch and I'm like, I am not connecting to this 100%, but I can respect what it's trying to do. I would love to. It's like one of those movies I was thinking about where, like, even if whether or not I think it's good or bad, if it, like, changes the way I view the world for a little bit, I think there has to be, like, value in that. And I was thinking about it because we didn't have anything in the freezer. I was watching this yesterday and we didn't have anything in the freezer. And to my wife, I was like, should I just run to Trader Joe's and we'll just, like, pack up with frozen stuff? And she was like, sure. So I went. And then, like, the drive over to Trader Joe's felt so surreal after watching, like, an hour of this movie. Because it just, like, changes the way you view reality. Even the movie is about our understanding of reality, and the way the film is shot sort of, like, changes your perception of, like, how you view the world. And I, like, think part of what that whole quote unquote slow cinema thing, that's like a sort of a buzzwordy way of putting a lot of these types of movies into one category. But even the ones that I'm like, I'm having a hard time sitting here and watching this, I can respect the way that it, like, changes sort of and sort of tries to retrain your understanding of the world to try to tell you something, whether or not that is, like, always, like, an enjoyable experience. So that was a whole long way of saying I would own it. I'd give it the old 4 out of 5 on the old letterbox.
We'll have to buy you the Criterion collection.
Chris, what would you think of Solaris?
I've been pretty clear about my criticism of this movie, like its glacial pace, its poor editing choices. I mean, and that being said, though, like, this is a well-made film overall. It's well acted. I love the production design. I think if Tarkovsky didn't intend to, but he made the perfect companion film to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And I think if you are a hardcore science fiction fan, like, this has to be on your list to watch because of just how influential it has been and how its DNA can be seen in so many other films that have come out after it in the last 50 years. Not going to call it a wood own. I'll call it a wood watch because I feel like if you're firmly entrenched in the science fiction genre, this has to be a film you watch at least once.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
What about you, Sean?
I'll wrap it up. I would put this as a wood own as well. The pacing, to me, also, it got to me at parts where I had to pause and I would just, like, get up, go to the bathroom, and, like, kind of like 2 minutes of, like, all right, let's get some food. But I did enjoy his choices. I thought the choice, like the pacing, to me, it felt like he was kind of trying to immerse the audience in, like, what it would be like in such a lonely space up there. And just, like, moments would go by where it's just, like, nothing happens and you're just bored out of your mind. And so the choices, while sometimes were baffling, like the raining inside and, like, the long drive through, I guess, Tokyo, where you're just like, what is going on? But maybe that was a choice, I want people to be bored because that's what driving is like at times, Who knows? Inside his mind. So I admired his choices. I agree with you, Chris. I think if you're a sci-fi fan, you have to watch this at least once just to kind of get the experience. Mm-hmm. But I would say, in terms for me hosting a viewing party, it has to be something that really tickles my pickle. And this wasn't tickling me all the way.
No, it's got to be a movie like Back to the Future or Aliens or something.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm assuming you want to keep your friends, right?
That's right. I would love to keep my friends instead of torture them. So, yeah, I would put this as a wood own.
It feels like the most, like, grad school studying, like, film history thing to be like, I'm having a Tarkovsky party. We all have to show up and watch, like, all the Tarkovskys.
Yes.
It's like such a stunt. like to stunt on people like that. Like, are you intellectual enough to watch like these movies in a party setting?
It's a horrible thing to do to people.
Yeah.
I just imagine people that have those parties, they wear like unironic clothing. You know?
I'd rather
like
have
overalls, but they live in Chicago.
It's a lot of like shoulder patches.
yeah.
honestly, I'd rather have
Which I
host
have
a
a
viewing party of Requiem for a Dream.
Oh, burn.
They could
Take
have-
that, Darren Aronofsky.
And I
Oh,
actually
my
did
gosh.
that back in the day when I was 18, living in Florida. I hosted a viewing party of that movie, and I kept my friends.
You know, side note, the director that made that movie was influenced by this film.
I can believe it.
Yeah.
Darren Aronofsky is the man.
Yeah, yeah.
I can
Oh
believe it.
yeah, he's another one,
Cited
right? Like
Solaris.
he's another one where you can see like the ripples of the Tarkovsky movies and what he's doing.
Absolutely.
A good note to close out this episode. Sean, great pick. Another great pick here in Foreign Sci-Fi Month. What are we talking about next time?
So next time we're going to review the film. It's called Time Crimes, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's by some director that I'm going to look up right now. But it's a 2007 Spanish science fiction thriller film directed by Nacho Vigalondo.
Oh, sí.
Great name.
There we go, Brian. Absolutely. So I'm excited to bring that one up for the next one. Like I said, it was just a random pick from the old Googles.
Nice.
So we'll check it.
Well, Brian McLeod, Matt Hooper, thank you so much for joining us on this continued entry in Foreign Sci-Fi Month.
Thank you for having me.
Matt just joining us again, or joined us for The City of Lost Children. So we'll also look back at that episode. And yeah, we've got Time Crimes coming out, and our last entry is going to be a bit of a secret. You'll have to tune into Time Crimes to find out what that's going to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. As always, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Likewise, my friend.
All right, folks. So if you enjoyed this episode of Force-Fed Sci-Fi, please come back. Check out us on our website, www.forcefedsci-fi.com. We're on Spotify, Apple, any type of streaming service where you get your Spotify podcast, music, whatever. Check us out. Like, subscribe, give us a comment, or send us an email for a movie that you want us to review. For me and the rest of the Force-Fed Sci-Fi team, we'll see you next time. Bye. James Cameron.